All right, this is the lecture for chapters 9 and 10. Great. Probably 15 to 20 minutes per chapter. So chapter 9 is on evaluation, and evaluation is one of the things that I built my career on. And it's based around a really simple question, which is how do you know when a program is working or not? There are lots of different ways to answer that question, but that's the basic question. How do you know that clients are being served? How do you know that they're getting better or improving? How do you know that a community is improving? Or how do you know that you can also have an evaluation on a process? How do you know that the process is working the way that it's supposed to as well? So let's go through some of that. It's all program evaluation in the macro context. So why engage in program evaluation? Again, if you want to receive continued support, if you want to have funding, if you want to be sure, there are lots of good ideas, but how do you know what actually works? And when you know something works, you can prove it quantitatively, or you can prove that it will work. You know, if we serve 100 clients, we know that 70 are going to significantly improve in their math scores, and they're going to end up going to college or whatever. That's a great story that you can share with funders as well. There's also an ethical component as well, because if you're doing something and you don't know that it works, unless you're specifically doing a pilot to test that out, there may be some ethical things to think about. We certainly shouldn't be doing programming that doesn't work, but it happens more than you think. But not with us, right, guys? And again, how do we know it does what we're doing work, and how do we know it works? All right. So a couple of concepts in evaluation, and some of this you'll know from stats, but I'm going to go through it anyways, but not to a heavy degree. If you haven't taken a stats course, you probably should, and you certainly will be in grad school as well. Don't expect mastery of these concepts, but a basic understanding of what these are. So the first two are the control group and the experimental group. And these are very important concepts, maybe some of the most important, because if we do a program with a group of people and they get better, how do we know that they weren't going to get better anyways? So for example, if we do a nutrition program with 8-year-olds, guess what? Almost all of them are going to grow and gain weight because they're going to go through maturation and through puberty, right? So does this nutrition program significantly help them over what their peers would be doing anyways? So the control group is the group that typically doesn't get any sort of intervention, and they set the baseline for how something goes. But the experimental group is the group that you're doing your program with to see, does this actually work? And if it works, how different are the results than with the control group? Dependent variables are the things that you try to hold constant, and the independent variable is the thing that you're trying to manipulate. Sampling is important because sometimes you can't survey 100% of the people in a community, for example, but you say, all right, we can do 200. We can do a sample of, if there are 40,000 people in this community, we can actually do interviews with 200 of them. So let's make sure that we get a good diverse audience that matches the demographics of our community. So we have either proper sampling, or let's do 200. If there are 40,000 phone numbers, let's call 200 them randomly, and that's another way to do it as well. So a representative sample or a random sample. Experimental versus quasi-experimental, we don't need to get into that too much. You do want to know baseline, which is, again, what's the thing that would have happened regardless of whether we were there or not? Because something would have happened. To assume something's going to stay the same is typically not true. Now, sometimes it might be, but other times it's not. So what's the baseline? And when you have your baseline, then you can understand what does the intervention actually do, whether it's higher or lower. And I'm not going to worry about standard deviation reliability. Y'all are going to learn that in the stats class. Validity, face validity doesn't measure what it says it's going to measure. Predictive validity can you predict from doing this? For example, reading on level at 3rd grade is predictive of whether someone graduates from high school. I said that before, and the reason is because before 3rd grade, you learn to read. After 3rd grade, you read to learn. So if you can't read, you're going to have trouble in math and science and those kind of classes as well. So third grade reading does have both face validity of what it seems to measure, which is are they reading on level, and predictive validity, which is being able to predict how likely they are to graduate high school based on that. I'm not going to worry about descriptive versus inferential statistics. Outcomes are obviously very important because this is what we're doing. Again, outputs are the number of people that we're serving. Outcomes is what happens to them because of the service. And we don't need to, I'm not going to worry about the details within these things because a lot of these are statistical concepts that are related more to the academic work than the program work, like the chi-square test and that type of stuff. Correlation is an important concept, and y'all should know the difference between correlation and causation or causality. All correlation means is that two things are connected, whereas causation means that one thing caused another. So a lot of times the social services will say, well, people of minority status tend to be poor, therefore one causes the other. No, there might be a correlation there based on meta statistics, but there is not necessarily a causation there. So correlation is the connection between two things, but it doesn't say in which direction the relationship goes, just that they're tied together. Causation means A caused B to happen. And that's very, very important, hugely important difference. All right, problems and barriers in program evaluation. Failure to plan for evaluation. That's why even in the first memo that I had the class do, I talked about what is your evaluation plan to see if this works or not. Lack of program stability. This could be program staff leaving, which is a huge challenge. It could be people that aren't trained well. It could be programs shut down or open up depending on the funding. All these things can cause barriers with service delivery and also with evaluation. The relationship between evaluators and practitioners, sometimes they're too close, sometimes there's no connection, which means that evaluators are just looking at data on the back end without any context and don't know what to make of it. So evaluation should be built in from the start. When the evaluation results are unclear or sometimes they're not accepted, they say, someone says, this program doesn't work, or at least we don't have data to support that it works. And someone else says, no, we've done this program for years and it's something that everyone cherishes, so we're not going to stop doing it just because you say so. That's obviously bad evaluation. Then there's sometimes also when the evaluation is actually not worth the effort, just because it's too much work for something that's too small, or the results are not able to be measured, which actually does happen sometimes. This is typically a bad excuse, but sometimes it is valid. All right, so 3 types of evaluations: formative, summative. Formative and summative. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so summative is impact. Does it work or not? Formative is the program working the way that it's supposed to. So, for example, a summative evaluation will be able to tell you if a client goes through this, are they more likely to have a better result over the baseline? Whereas formative will come in and say, is the program running the way that it's supposed to? If we have a flow chart that says A, B, C, and D happen, are those things actually happening? Is the data being collected? Are the staff following the protocols? Those types of things. Because sometimes programs would actually work fine, but people aren't carrying them out the right way. Sometimes because they don't actually know what was supposed to happen because the program plan wasn't clear enough. This is a big deal later in our semester when we actually work on program plans ourselves. To be part of the reason you do program plan is to let the people who are implementing it know this is how this was designed, this is how it's supposed to be carried out every single step. And you also look at effectiveness versus efficiency evaluations. There are programs that are effective, but they're not efficient. And so effectiveness means it works. Efficiency means, well, it works, but it could be working better, or it costs too much money, or if a program cost us $1,000 for every client, it might be both effective and efficient. If a program gives us the same outcomes for $100,000 per client, it might still be effective because it works, but it's not very efficient or not very cost effective. All right, we're not going to worry too much about design here, but we are going to talk for a minute about quantitative versus qualitative. Quantitative are the hard numbers. Qualitative is kind of the softer side of interviewing and those types of things. Now, there are examples where different parts of this are true, but when you're doing community interviews, that is qualitative. When you're doing community Surveys are looking at census data that's quantitative. Skip one group, post-test designs. We can't talk actually for a minute about pre-test means what happens before it starts, and then post-test is what happens after the results of are done. So if someone is in clinical service and there's a test called the Global Assessment of Functioning that used to be used, and it was a number, and it was 0 to 100, but it's typically 20 to 80. If you were at 50, you were kind of in some trouble. If you were at a 40, you were not able to hold down a job or have good, lasting relationships. If you were at like a 70 or an 80, you could have a job and you had good quality of life. So you want to see clients go up from the pre-test to the post-test. They might start at a 45, and you hope that they end up at a 70 or a 75 by the time they're done with the survey. You can also do what's called a retrospective post, or which is to look at someone at the end of service and not to the beginning one, to say how much have things changed since the start. That's a little more tricky. You always want to do a pretest if you can. There are cost reasons why you might not be able to, but it's always good to say before someone starts where they actually are. Client satisfaction surveys are a good thing, but they're not sufficient for the programming that you're going to want to run in the future. It's good that someone's happy with your service. They better be, because otherwise you're doing something wrong. Or if they're not, there better be a good reason why people, I don't like doing this, but I know I have to achieve my goal. But a lot of times when someone says, oh, 95% success rate, they're actually talking about client satisfaction surveys. Because it's really hard to get 95% of people to do anything. So it's good, but it's not everything. But goal attainment is a little different, which is how is someone setting, what are their goals for being in the service that they're in, and how are you measuring progress on those goals? All right. I'm not going to worry too much about this. Case studies are a great method to use because you can look at a cohort or group of people and see what they're going through. And then in written form, in fact, we're going to do some case studies later on in the class too. But you can see how something works from kind of the big picture and from a written narrative perspective or an interviewing perspective, or even looking at different groups in their actual quantitative data. Quality assurance is really important as well. So looking at, again, is this program being carried out the way that it's supposed to? Are the protocols being implemented correctly? Those types of things. All right, so we're not going to spend too much time on the 4 stages in evaluation, but just go through them quickly. The first is conceptualization and goal setting. What are you trying to do? How are you trying to accomplish it? Second is measuring things. The third is sampling to make sure that you've sampled enough people to make sure that you've got a valid instrument, and that you might not be able to survey all 100 people, but you need to know that you need at least 65 in order for it to be representative if you do the sampling the right way, for example. Now, you'd like to talk to all 100, but that's too expensive, as one example. And then design, not going to worry about prestige, validity, and maturation. All right, 6 common evaluation designs. It's been not too much time on this part, but pre-experimental designs, again, looking at pre-test, post-test versus post-test only, different types of groups. Quasi-experimental versus experimental. Experimental is random. Quasi-experimental is not random. There's sometimes when you can't get a random group, and I think that's fine. It's fine for social services. Different evaluators feel differently. So I'm sorry, we got a couple. We've got I think 3 more stages in evaluation from earlier. Data gathering, what types of instruments, tests, and scales you're using. I always say don't recreate the wheel. If there's something out there that has been validated or is evidence-based, use that first. So using existing programs, and you're going to hear that when we talk about program planning. I don't want you to be making up your own program unless there's nothing else out there that exists like this. But I want you to use something that has already been used and tested, and people think highly of. It's either evidence-based, or it's got some strong evidence, or it's an emerging program, something like that. And within that, you'll be using existing instruments because of validity and reliability. So again, something that's worked somewhere else, and it's going to work if you tweak it to meet your population. But at least you know that it's been used somewhere else and that it works. Not going to worry about data analysis. Others say that you got to crunch the data, and you can get a whole PhD in that stuff if you want to. All right, so data presentation, and this is more, this is the way that you do something in paper form. It's going to look a little different if you're actually presenting to a group by doing an oral or verbal presentation. But y'all know this is introduction, sometimes what we call an executive summary, right? Literature review. A lot of times when you do a paper, for an academic paper, you'll be doing a literature review up front. But when you're actually doing a memo or presenting to the board or your management team, the literature review will be the last part because they don't care about that. They just want to go down to the results and discussion. But you really care about literature review and methodology. So again, for written, this is going to be higher up. For oral presentation, depending on your audience, if it's academics, it's going to be this. If it's going to be practitioners, you're going to focus on results and discussion. And then you will say, okay, here's how we went about it. So one of the things that I'm going to always be saying is keep it simple, keep your data simple. Can you cut anything? Is there anything that doesn't necessarily need to be there? Can someone understand it if they're not in your field? As your executive summary, you know how I feel about that. Ethics and values, you'll probably take an entire class on this, but to say that if people are participating, they need to be informed of you're participating in the study. Here's what we know so far. Here are some of the risks associated with it. They're not typically physical risks, but there will be, if you think about clinical trials for medication, for example, and those types of things, even in social services, people need to know what they're getting into. One of the risks for counseling, for example, is there is confidentiality, but if there's a court-ordered subpoena, then the clinician's going to have to break confidentiality and share what their progress notes say, because that's the law. And so they always talk about that in the first day of counseling, that here are some limits to what we can do, once you know this up front. And if you've have a friend who's a counselor or participated in yourself, you'll know that you always get this at the first session. Privacy, very important. A lot of times data is supposed to be double locked, and so if it's a physical client file or a volunteer file, the first lock is going to be the filing cabinet that you'll always have in your office, and the second lock is going to be your door, which when you're not there is supposed to be locked. That's your double lock. There are different standards for electronic files, which are at very high risk sometimes, but those are a little different, but the idea is the same, so that you got to stringently guard them. Some more ethics stuff. All right, that is good for chapter 9. Chapter 10, advocacy and social action with at-risk populations. Excuse me. Okay, so some quick definitions. Advocacy is representing, championing, or defending the rights of others. And that can be any other. Case advocacy is for individuals and families. Cause advocacy is more macro, is for populations, is for communities, those types of things. So again, case advocacy is micro, cause advocacy is macro. Case versus cause. Social action is a coordinated event. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but it's a coordinated effort, which means that it's not just being done by one person one time. Empowerment is about power, ability, and the authority to achieve self-determination, something that psychologists call agency, which is the ability to choose and to act on that choice. It's empowerment. At-risk populations are those that they don't necessarily have to be suffering, but they're the most likely to be suffering economic hardship, discrimination, oppression, those types of things. So again, at-risk doesn't mean being harmed. It means that they're at risk. So examples of populations: minority populations, women traditionally, children and older people traditionally as well, low-income people, and a number of others as well. Yeah. Lesbian and gay persons, immigrants and refugees. Clients receiving public assistance, aka low-income clients. Folks with mental or physical disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, those types of things. We've made a lot of progress as a society in a lot of these areas, but there are a lot of examples of where we're not there yet. and so all these populations and folks are still at risk. It doesn't mean that they're experiencing harm, but they are at higher risk to experience harm. This class isn't about advocacy. If you're interested in that, you should actually take a full class, because there's a lot to learn, and a lot of the grad schools have actually really great classes about advocacy. But a couple of things we'll go through. The first is, again, you're not doing this alone, so teamwork produces better outcomes. And it's helpful to have someone who's a data nerd who can compile stats, someone who's really good at marketing and communications, or at least talking to folks, and so they can translate that into plain language. Someone who's got some power behind the scenes at the city or the state level, someone who can get clients to a hearing so that they can put a human face on what's going on. So having different people fill different roles is very important. Being an advocate requires being assertive, means putting your neck out there. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it can actually clap back on you as well. Having flexibility in terms of your goals is a strength and not a weakness. You're not always going to win, like it says, but sometimes you will lose. But a lot of times compromise happens, which means that change happens, but it happens slowly. And that is a good thing, although it never feels like it at the time. So different types of tactics. One is persuasion, that you're working one-on-one with someone to convince them by data, by showing them a client vignette for a story, by having them meet with the client, that this is wrong, we need to fix this. Fair hearings, grievances, complaints, so taking formal action, embarrassing the target of change. That's kind of the nuclear button, because when it works well, but if it doesn't, and even sometimes when it does, it creates a lot of hostility and resentment. So you can go there, but be ready for the consequences. Political pressure, petitioning, those types of things. Okay, so Saul Alinsky's social action approach. Very important stuff. This is there are techniques that we'll hit quickly. This is social work 101 for macro. Power is the appearance of what you have, not what you actually have. It's the leverage that you have, and that's a really important thing. You acquire power by taking it, not by having it given to you. So this could be good or bad, but this is kind of cause advocacy 101, that no one's going to make changes just because it should happen. So are you willing to do what it takes? Using methods that are familiar to you but unfamiliar to the target system. So when you're talking to folks, you don't use acronyms. Don't give them a whole lot of information that can handle. Maybe make 3 quick points, something that's salient, that makes sense to them, even if they have no idea what you're talking about. You can even use comparisons to things that they do know something about. So making sure that your language is friendly and that you're thinking about, from their perspective, what makes sense, given their knowledge and their skills and their background and what they care about, not from your perspective. Power is essential to change the status quo, won't change on itself. Making organizations live by their own rules. And this is a great way to say, you promised in the last legislative session that you would do this, but by this date, and this hasn't happened. Organize people around issues that are vital to them. It's really hard to get people to care about issues that they don't care about. I know that sounds really, really kind of straightforward, but it's often true. When something that you're passionate about, you wonder why no one else cares about this. But there are a lot of other issues that a lot of other people care about that you might not. And so just kind of knowing yourself, knowing your audience, knowing your stakeholders, and what do they actually care about, it's a lot easier to get people to work on things that they're already riled up about than to try to get them riled up about something that may or may not make a difference in their own lives. So that's why a lot of health causes, you'll see that people are there because they've got family members and friends who have suffered from that health condition. And it would be impossible, to rile someone up for, to spend all their time volunteering on behalf of multiple sclerosis, for example, if they didn't know someone who'd been personally impacted by that. So you have to find things that people actually care about and organize around that. So if you have an issue that you really care about, the first thing you do is find kindred spirits, people who already care about it. Much easier than trying to make people care. And that's true for every issue, not just in this. People in power respond to political pressure. That's true. Be clear about the difference between the groups that are served, are impacted, know your stuff, turn negatives into positives, and again, be prepared to propose an alternative. It's one thing to say, we got a problem. Then someone says, that's a good point. What do you want to do about it? You say, I don't know. I just, I thought we had a problem. And then they kick you out of their office because you've wasted their time. So have a solution ready. and have several solutions and several compromises ready, and know what you want to stick your ground about and know what you can give ground on, because that's how change works. So again, that's Saul Alinsky's social action approach, 10 steps. We're not going to get into a lot of social action is legal and is ethical. There are ways that you have to go about it. There's some very famous examples that they give here in the book about the civil rights movement and women's suffrage and other places, but that's pretty straightforward. Participatory action research is people who are being, so said for a homeless population, is involving folks who are experiencing homelessness in efforts to study, identify, and carry out the interventions. It's incredibly effective, and it combines advocacy with program evaluation, with program design and planning, and is a great way to do things. Sometimes it's hard, but what you don't want to do is be sitting there in your office and say, oh, I know how to solve someone else's problems, and then you create a model and get funding without ever having talked to them. That's the wrong way to do it. It's very similar to the plan change process. So it's right there in the title. So participating, working with the person that you want to help. And so the process is very similar to the plan change process. Assessment, there are fewer steps, but it's the same stuff. Assessment and problem description, right? Include the clients in that. Planning, include the clients in that. Intervention, which is a program, include the clients in that. Evaluation, include the clients. Identifying lessons learned, going back to the drawing board. Again, the big part is participatory. That is being done with someone, not for them or on their behalf. It's really both. Legislative advocacy, again, this is a whole specific thing. If you're interested in that, you'll get a class on it in grad school. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. All right, that ends it for chapters 9 and 10. I think that was about half an hour, maybe a little bit less, but that should give you a good overview. And so, thank you, and see you soon.